course. In the video today, we're going to be looking at Marx's concept of alienation. I want to begin by giving a brief overview of some of Marx's writings. Marx wrote the Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right, a work of political economy, and the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts, also a work of political economy, when he was quite young, maybe around 25 years of age. The contribution to the Critique of Political Economy was also a work of political economy. As he became older, he wrote some of the other very well-known pieces, such as the Manifesto of the Communist Party, which is a political tract, and Capital, a work of political economy. He also wrote the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, a work of journalism, and the German ideology, which is part of a theory of history. There is often a divide posited by later thinkers such as Louis Althusser between the young Marx of the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts and the later Marx of Capital. These later thinkers rejected the humanism of the early Marx and his concern with alienation in favor of the scientific Marx of Capital. But today we shall delve into this younger Marx and his concept of alienation, with a view to understanding later in the course how these different Marxes could be reconciled. Now for some brief background. Marx was writing as a polemic in response to certain idealist German philosophers of the day, including Hegel, Feuerbach, and Fichte. Idealism was a philosophy which posited that ideas are the only reality. There is no reality outside of our subjective consciousness. Marx posited what was called the materialist conception of history. This was something first presented in his Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts, and then later developed in the German ideology. The movement of history for Marx is the history of modes of production. These include pre-capitalist, feudal, semi-feudal, and capitalist. Society and how people relate to one another within a society is linked to the mode of production, which gives meaning to human relations. In this video, we're going to look at the concept of alienation, as described by Marx in the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts. Let's look at how capitalist society comes about through the separation of labor, capital, and land. In a pre-capitalist society, Marx says, people owned their own tools by which they produced for themselves and their communities to satisfy subsistence needs. After the transition to feudal and capitalist society, now someone else owns the tools and expropriates the goods that are produced. They, the capitalist, pays a wage to the worker who purchases goods in order to satisfy their subsistence needs. For Marx, alienation consists of two sets of relations, relation A and relation B. Relation A consists of three elements. The first element is the relationship of the worker to the object. Marx says that the alienation of the worker from the product means that their labor becomes an object. Labor exists outside of the worker, that is, it does not belong to the worker. I once visited a shoe factory in India and Madras. 100% of the shoes that were manufactured in that factory was sent to Europe for the use of people there. The workers themselves walked barefoot. This is an example of alienation. Workers produce for a foreign market and not for their own subsistence. They are alienated from the product of their labor. Compare this to the Amish, who produce within their own communities and for their own use. Amish as producers are not alienated from the object. The second element of relation A is the relationship between the worker and production. This is the relation of labor to the act of production within the labor process. So it's not just the finished object, the shoes in my previous example, that don't belong to the worker, but also the activity of production no longer belongs to the worker. The third element of relation A is the relationship of species being, or humans, to life activity. Humans separate themselves from their life activity, the activities necessary to meet their immediate needs. Compare this to animals who produce only what they need for themselves and their young. Humans produce even when they have satisfied their immediate needs. With alienation, the object of production, the activity of production, and life activity itself become alienated from humans. If these things no longer belong to the worker, then to whom do they belong? They belong to the master of labor, to the capitalist. The capitalist is a class that consumes but does not produce. Their consumption is the condition of the labor of the worker. This brings us to relation B. The first element of relation B is that of the non-worker, or the capitalist, to the worker. The second element of relation B is that of the non-worker to the object. Now for Marx, private property is really at the heart of these relations. Private property is both the product of alienated labor and the means by which labor becomes alienated. He defines it as such. Private property, as the material summary expression of alienated labor, embraces both relations. The relation of the worker to work, to the product of his labor, and to the non-worker, and the relation of the non-worker to the worker and to the product of his labor. One of Marx's insights is that capital is accumulated labor. Let's take the traditional political economy, say, of a clothes factory. We have the raw material, or the cotton, we have the worker, and we have the capital, which is the sewing machine. The object that is being produced by this factory is clothes. Now, in our understanding of traditional political economy, the object belongs to the owner because all of the inputs belong to the capitalist. But according to Marx, capital is itself a product of labor that has been alienated from the worker. Communism for Marx is the reversal of alienation. It is a reclaiming of private property away from the capitalist and back to the worker as the rightful owner of what they have produced, both capital and the object, as well as their own labor power.